Hey everyone, Midits here. Rent's due, so it's time to discuss another Diary of a Wimpy Kid book. But this one isn't your average book in the series. It acts as sort of a transition point for the franchise. The live-action trilogy had ended, and the book stopped taking inspiration from the original 2004 version. And here, while there are clearly still aspects of classic Wimpy Kid in the story, you can sense the seeds of plot elements that will grow across future installments. The Diary of a Wimpy Kid book that changed everything is, of course, 2014's Diary of a Wimpy Kid: The Long Haul. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and let's head straight into this. Being the 9th book in the series, The Long Haul follows Greg and the rest of the Heffley family on a sudden summer road trip. This book is not the same as what came before, since outside of the Heffley family, there are few references to other supporting characters from across the series. It's also important to note that the road trip is the entirety of the story, which is also different from previous books. While prior entries did have specific characters or events as the main driving force for the narrative, there are tons of other side stories that created the feeling that Greg was still living his regular life. There are some other things that are noticeably different, but I'll call them out when we get to them in the story. The book starts with Susan out of the blue dropping that the family will be going on a road trip. We then see the Heffleys prepare, which brings me to one thing I want to mention about the book and how it relates to the rest of the modern series. One major issue I've had with some more recent Wimpy Kid books is that Greg doesn't have as much of a defined personality, being less cynical, self-absorbed, lazy, and witty as he was in earlier titles. He also doesn't do much to advance the plot, more so the plot happens to him. While the latter is the case here, Greg and even the rest of the Heffleys are pretty in character for most of the long haul. But it's a shame that previous supporting characters, including Rowley, are entirely relegated to the sidelines if they are even mentioned. Another thing I noticed is how the book still contains smaller side stories, despite the vacation narrative. In non-vacation stories, it's usually a combination of things that happened in Greg's past and random things that happened during Greg's day. But here, it's almost entirely flashbacks. This once again shows how different this book feels, as it is a lot less like a journal compared to what came before. Another thing regarding flashbacks across the story is that most of these deviations from the main plot don't have much relevance to the overall narrative. While that does exist in previous books, and I do like it sometimes because it shows that not everything has to be related to the main story, it does feel like it happens more often in the long haul. However, one minor point that is actually important is how Susan brings along some Spanish CDs for the family to learn a new language together. It's a minuscule thing mentioned early on, but it's something you need to remember. Well, there's that and one other thing. Despite the Heffleys bringing Frank's boat for extra storage, the car is super cramped, so Greg decides to bring a pillow. Now, despite some of the minor gripes I've mentioned, I find this book to have some pretty funny moments, and here's one great example. The Heffleys play a flashcard game called I Must Confess, where one person has to read a card and someone earns a point if they've done the thing said on the card. Frank and Roger are tied and need one more point when Susan states, I must confess, I've toilet papered a neighbor's house. Roger then celebrates his victory, not realizing the path he just set himself on. Susan believes Roger is lying, but he then digs himself into a deeper grave, explaining that he and his bandmates toilet papered their neighbor's house because they called the police because of how loud they were playing their music. So Susan then forces Roderick to call their neighbor and apologize. So yeah, many people have said that Roderick is a lot smarter than he lets on, and while that is the case, he's still not that smart. The Heffleys purchase some food and head to a motel where we are introduced to the main antagonist of the story, although antagonist may not be the correct word. Eventually, I have to discuss the elephant in the room with this book, so I might as well do it now. The Diary of a Wimpy Kid: The Long Haul movie. I don't want to go into it too much, who knows, I can maybe make a video on it in the future, but I want to provide a comparison here to show what the book gets right. The movie shows the Beardos as these comedically evil villains, while the book shows a very different perspective. This is first shown when in the film, Greg gets pretty reasonably mad at the Beardo kids for messing around with the cleaning cart. One of the kids then shoves the cleaning cart at Greg, it misses, and hits the Beardo's car, and said kid then pins it on Greg. Compare that to the book where Greg gets out, gets mad at the kids for what they're doing, and one of them goes into the room to get their dad. Greg in both situations is pretty reasonably in the right, but in the film scenario, it makes the Beardos appear so much worse. While something like this happening is obviously possible, moments like these would really take away from the ending of the original book. So it was probably a smart move to change the ending. Man, if only more good decisions were made during the creation of that movie. Greg has another encounter with the Beardos while they're driving, where Greg and the kids start making faces at each other in their cars. One of the kids then faceplants into the back window when the car starts moving. Greg would probably be happy with the karma if it wasn't for the fact that Mr. Beardo saw him when Frank passes by the car. While this book doesn't suffer from this issue that much, it acts as a foundation that later entries begin utilizing. That's the use of wacky shenanigans. where a bad situation escalates at a rapid pace as it gets progressively worse to the point of parody. Now, this isn't something this book invented. There have definitely been some over-the-top situations that have happened before in this series, but they're mostly pretty spread out and are still roughly in the realm of possibility. While that applies to a good chunk of this book too, you can start to see the beginnings of really out there stuff happening, and it can all be traced back to the jumping of the shark, or in this case, the jumping of the pig. At a country fair, Manny manages to correctly guess the weight of a hog in a contest, and he gets the winning prize of a pet pig. Despite trying to decline the gift, Susan is basically forced to take it by the crowd at the fair. Things have been a fair bit hectic so far, and now they have a barn animal to deal with. Roderick says that bacon comes from pigs, like eggs come from chickens. This might be an example of him being written a bit too dumb. Anyway, the pig causes a huge mess in the Heffley's hotel, destroying the bathroom and eating from the minibar. This is made worse by the fact that pets aren't allowed, and the Heffleys had snuck the pig into the hotel in the first place. And what follows next is what I believe to be the first proper instance of, and say it with me, wacky shenanigans. One moment of the book is inspired by a real event in Jeff Kinney's life as a kid, where his pet rabbit almost jumped out of a car window, but his mom pulled it back into the car just in time. That's a pretty crazy situation, and it's definitely something I would remember if happened to me during a road trip, but I don't think that when that happened to Jeff Kinney, that he also dealt with his dad making a phone call with the car's sunroof being stuck open, with his dad then driving the car with his knees trying to close the sunroof, with their pet stealing a pacifier and biting someone, with the car swerving as Spanish lessons are playing. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible. Now, you might make the point that the story is fictional and doesn't have to be super realistic. While I believe realism has been a pretty consistent part of this franchise up to this point, that is a fair assessment. There have been some moments that have teared over the line, and I could excuse this moment if it was the only time something like this happened in the book. You can probably guess where this is going, but we first have to get a bit further in the book to get there. Susan and Frank decide to give the pig to a petting zoo, and they proceed to get Greg checked at a veterinarian's office because first, Greg got bit by the pig, and second, they couldn't find a regular doctor nearby. Greg then mentions how this feels like a sort of payback for when Sweetie got his stomach pumped because Susan thought Sweetie had eaten something that Greg ate. As you can see, in this book, he's still the same Greg we all know and tolerate because he's funny. Afterward, Frank makes a patch up for the sunroof, which refuses to close. This then, unfortunately for the Heffleys, backfires as the homemade sunroof collapses and pours water and bugs on them. At one point, the Heffleys are driving when they see a bunch of cars passing red lights. They proceed to come to a gap between two cars when they realize that the cars are now following them. They then see flags on the cars behind them, showing that the cars were all part of a funeral procession. The Heffleys try to get away from the cars, but they keep following them, so they decide to drive to the nearest cemetery. Only one problem though, it's the wrong one. I'm starting to think these might not be the best people. After somehow making it out of there alive, the Heffleys decide to head to the beach, and we reach what takes the cake for the most absurd moment in the book. Roderick is driving since Frank gets nauseous driving over bridges. Greg sees a seagull and tosses it a cheese curl. It then gets on top of the Heffley's car wanting more. Greg gives it another one, but it bounces off the seagull's beak, so now the seagull is in the car. It then hits the roof while trying to get out and begins to freak out. The seagull then tries to take the rest of Greg's cheese curls, with Greg desperately trying to hold on to them, which is admittedly a very Greg thing to do. The seagull gets the bag, but then dumps the cheese curls back into the car once it flies out. Then a whole flock of seagulls go into the car, and by the time the chaos is over, they realize that they accidentally rear-ended someone's car. By this point, their trip to the beach is over before it even began, but they then realize that the auto repair shop they're at is super close to a water park, so they decide to go there instead. Once again, there are parts of this book that I really enjoy, so let me highlight this moment. Greg and Roderick decide to play hide and seek in the pool, and they use a placemat to show that they didn't hide underwater. Greg goes first when people suddenly start freaking out around him. That's when Greg realizes what Roderick wrote on the mat. I once again have to say that the characterization of the Heffleys in this book is really good for the most part. Greg goes back to their lounge chair when he sees that it's gone with their stuff on the floor. It turns out that the Beardos took the chair, and Greg decides that it's for the best to just not confront them. After that, they decide to go, but they realize they don't have the key to their locker. After looking, the Heffleys try to remember their locker number, and Greg believes that the number is 929, but when they go there, it's empty. So Greg believes that the Beardos, who have left the water park by this point, stole their stuff. Completely defeated at this point, the Heffleys begin their trip home, cutting things short. After this, we see the Heffleys go through back-to-back suffering, with the tarp on the boat opening and launching out their stuff, with the 5 of them having to share one box of chicken nuggets, a biscuit, and barbecue sauce packets, and with them thinking they got shot at after a package of cinnamon rolls they bought earlier exploded. It honestly could not get any lower for the Heffley family. We're reaching Greek tragedy level suffering at this point. The Heffleys pass by the motel they stayed at earlier in the story when Greg notices the Beardos' car. By now, Greg has explained to everyone else who the Beardos were, and they decide to enter their motel room when they're out to see if they can find their stuff. Or at least that's what they tell themselves. They're taking turns watching outside while someone is using the bathroom when Greg sees the Beardos are returning. So Greg and Roger ditch Frank in the bathroom, and he by some miracle makes it out. But because things have been going clearly too well for them, the car breaks down sometime later. And to make matters worse, they rolled over a broken bottle, destroying one of their wheels. Luckily, Frank has some equipment to go and fix the wheel. That's until they realize that Greg took that out for his pillow. Which, hey, I gotta admit, that's a really great callback. They then see a vehicle similar to the Beardos, but it turns out to be completely different people. The only problem is that they don't speak English, so Susan and Frank decide to do this. And then we reach this moment. Manny, thanks to the Spanish CDs, I guess, manages to speak fluent Spanish with the two guys. I want to talk about this moment, but we're almost at the end of the book, so let's just get there first. Everyone else realizes that Manny told the guys to drive back to the petting zoo where Susan dropped off the pig, so now that's gonna be something they're consistently dealing with. They finally arrive home when Greg finds in his shorts the keys from the water park with the number 292. Greg thinks of 3, maybe 4 options of what he can do with the key, and the book ends there. I'm just going to assume he hit it with Mima's ring. This book is really something else, let me tell you. One thing I realized while looking over this book is how insanely fast-paced and eventful it is. Most books, especially after this, have really long introductions that lead into the main plot, but we just get straight into the road trip and things are constantly happening. The characters are pretty well written, albeit with some minor hangups across the book. Roger is shown to be a bit too dumb a couple times, and the whole thing with Manny learning fluent Spanish is absolutely ridiculous. Speaking of ridiculous, some moments get really close to going over the line of realism, like the drive before Susan gives away the pig and the seagull incident. While these aren't nearly as bad as some future installments, they kind of show the early symptoms of what will come later. The same kind of goes for the pig, as well as I do have some problems with this character. Almost all of them come from the next couple of books. Also, I really love how the Beardos are used in this story compared to the film, especially with the final reveal that Greg had the locker key the whole time. In the movie, they actually steal the Heffley stuff, although things do play out a bit differently as they never go to the water park. Meanwhile, in this version of events, the Beardos may have taken a lounge chair, but they didn't steal any of the Heffleys' actual property, so the Heffleys had no justifiable reason to call the police on them, let alone break into their motel room. It just makes them look like bad people, which is what makes the whole scenario great. Honestly, the long haul contains some small elements that might make it a mixed bag to some, but I do think the highs outweigh the lows by a decent amount to make an enjoyable entry in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series. And it's definitely the best Diary of a Wimpy Kid The Long Haul in the series. Speaking of which, if you want to see me talk about The Long Haul movie, show some support in the comments, because I definitely don't want to rewatch that movie if I don't have to. Overall, The Long Haul is pretty good, but it is a very clear sign of what is to come. Except, Old School is pretty good, and I already talked about Double Down. Man, I probably should have done these reviews in order. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, check out some of my other content. If you really did, subscribe so that you know when future content comes out. I have a Patreon, so join that if you want to help me continue making videos while also getting benefits in return. That's going to be it for now, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.